right, today we are going to dive into the theory behind the song Vienna by Billy Joel. What we're going to do is we're going to break down all of our chords, analyze them, figure out what they are, and talk about how to write them on the music. So let's dive right into measure one. We're going to ignore that little pickup, but we will land here. So basically what we need to do is figure out what notes they are that we're playing, figure out how they all go together, and then again, figuring out the chords. So let's see. We know that the forefinger here is going to land on the D in the right hand. The left hand, we're coming down. We do have a B flat here to start, a D, and an F sharp. Okay, so basically it goes, right? There's our chord. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of doubles in our hands. We can see that we do have double Ds, so I'm going to take the right hand out of there. So basically, there's our chord. Now, usually what we want to do is we want to reconfigure the chord. We want to figure out different inversions to see if there's a different shape that we need here. So let's just try that out. Basically, what we're looking for is a nice stacked version. And in fact, before we do that, what I actually usually like to do is get rid of sharps and flats. So let's go ahead and pull those guys out of there, which actually shows us that we are in the correct position. What we're looking for as we reconfigure the chord is we're looking for every other note. And here you can see we've got every other note. If we move the B up top, for example, this is what I mean by reconfiguring it, then all of a sudden we've got two notes in the middle of two of our notes of the chord, okay, which is what we don't want. Instead, we want that to be every other key like what we see. So that tells us even with the outside notes popping out to the black notes, okay, the B flat and the F sharp, that is in root position. So we know that it's a B flat type of chord, okay? A quick little rule here is there's a 4+3 rule versus a 3+4 rule, okay? Let's talk about the first one. So if we have 4 half steps followed by 3 half steps, that means we have a major chord, okay? That keeps things like kind of foolproof usually. So what I mean by that is if we take a look at the half steps in between, we know that B flat is part of our chord, right? So we aren't going to count that. And then we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. So that kind of is telling us it's a major chord already. That's what the 4 means at first. Then usually it would be 3 afterwards to give us a major chord. So again, we know this is part of the chord. We won't count that. And then we're going to go 1, 2, 3. So actually, there's our B flat major. And what's happened to this chord is we've raised it up 1 half step, raised the top note, the 5th of the chord, up 1 half step. When we do that, when we have a major chord and then raise the 5 up a half step, that is something called an augmented chord. So we're actually starting with what's called a B flat augmented chord. All right. The way that we write that in is right above the measure. You can do this below the measure as well. Technically, usually we have those above the measure. That's normally where you're going to see those. We are just going to write in B flat. You could put aug, right? If this is one of your first times analyzing a song and augmented is a brand new concept to you, that would be totally fine to write B flat aug. Our technical way of writing it though is with a plus. Okay, we've just taken it, we've expanded the chord is kind of what we mean by the plus. So again, usually our major chord is this, and we've taken the top note and expanded it out by a half step. And you could do that with any major chord. If you take C major, for example, take that top note and shift it up a half step, that would then be C augmented. Okay, kind of a tough chord there. Great, let's go ahead and move on to the next one. So our next chord, we're going to mainly observe just the first half. So kind of just looking at like these notes here is what we're looking at. Okay, so let's get those in our fingers first. Let's see, for the bass clef, looking at this guy specifically, we're going to think good burritos don't fall apart. So that's going to be an A flat is where we start. If we actually compare the first measure to the second measure, right, compare these guys to these guys right there, you can see they're exactly the same. So we still have the D and we still have the F sharp. Okay. Let's see. In the right hand, let me get rid of some of these circles. In the right hand, what we're looking at for the very first beat of that measure, and get back to my pen. So this guy right here is going to be a C. We're going to think F, A, C for the right hand notes or for the treble clef notes. So that's this guy here. So those are the notes that we're looking at. Okay. Let's see. Let me double check. Yeah. So those notes right there. Now I'm going to take the C and I'm going to pop it into my left hand. Okay. This one's kind of a tricky one here. What I'm actually going to do, well, let's first get rid of sharps and flats and everything. So I'm going to pull everything down just like that. Okay. Now you can see we've got these two notes together in the middle. So that's kind of creating a problem for us. We need to get those out of there and separate those two notes. So that tells me that either both of these guys need to move or both of these guys need to move, right? In order to separate these two middle notes here. So I'm going to go ahead and take the bottom two and move them up. Okay. So then I'm going to end up, we've got A, C, D, F here. I'm going to then take the A and C up. So we're left with D, F, A, C. And look at that. There's our nice stacked formation. Okay. We're playing every other note. Now we need to just add in our flats and our sharps. So again, here we had an F sharp and we had an A flat. Okay. Now, just for now, I'm going to get rid of the A flat. That's kind of throwing things off just a little bit. That would just be something you would have to know. Over time, you're going to realize, okay, this right here is kind of giving me a chord. If we add the A back in, you can really see kind of what chord that is. And if you're familiar with seventh chords, you can kind of hear what chord that is. But let's take a look at it here. So first of all, if we pretend it's an A instead of an A flat, and I'm going to get rid of the C just for a moment, we can see that that's going to give us a D major chord. Let's go back to our 4+3 rule for just a moment. So we've got the D, and then we're going to think 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. And then after that, we've got 1, 2, 3. So again, that's giving us D major. If we add on the C again, and we now give a number to every note. So now we're going to think 1, skipping the 2, we're hitting the 3. Skipping the 4, we're hitting the 5. Should be A flat, but we're pretending for now. And then we add one more note on. That's going to give us the 7. So 1, 3, 5, 7. So this is a D7 at its base. Okay, again, let's get rid of that A. Even without the A in there, that's still reading or sounding all of the above, reading and sounding as D7. Okay, so again, all we've done is just taken out the A flat. Let's go ahead and write down D7 because that's the core of the chord here. So again, at the top, we're just going to write D7 and 7 just because the D to the C, that's also giving us a 7th. If we walk through that and count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, that's another reason why we're calling that the 7th chord. Okay, cool. Then we also need the A flat back in here. So again, our chord, the shape of it is like that. So this is another tricky one. D7 over an A flat. Just because A flat doesn't really belong in a D7 chord. If you know things about jazz, you could technically call that a sharp 11. Okay, but we don't necessarily want to call it a sharp 11 here. We're just simply going to call it a D7 over A flat. All right, and the way that looks is we've got D7 backslash A flat. Okay, and that just tells us that there's a D7 chord, but it's over the A flat. Okay, hopefully that's making sense. These are tough chords here. Thanks, Billy Joel. Okay, awesome. On to the next one. Our next chord, we're again just going to look at the first half of this. The rest of it is just kind of, you can consider that as melody. It, of course, fits within the chord, but we're just looking at chords for right now. So looking at those guys, like we still have an A in the left hand. You can see that's basically carrying through between those two notes, right? But now we're going to bring it down to its natural state. So A natural is just going to be the white note there. Then we need to use some ledger lines. Let me help you out with the ledger lines if you're not sure how to navigate those. So here's A. We want to think just like line, space, line, space. So A would be the line, B would be the space. Here's C on the line, D in the space, and then E would be that first note. So we know that that guy right there is going to be an E. And then if we keep going, E, F, and then a G on top, and specifically G flat is what we're looking at. So basically A, E, and G flat are right hand. We basically go back to the C. You can see that that's staying the same between those two, right? So it's pretty similar on beat 1 between the two measures, just getting rid of the A flat. Here, again, it is going to be a C. We can just think like F, A, C. Usually we use the word face to get ourselves there. So a C in the right hand. Okay, so let's take a look at that. So if we've got, oops, I'll make sure that you can see everything here. There we go. Perfect. Okay, so if we've got A in the left hand, E flat. Ooh, we've got our key signature as well. So here in our key signature, we've got a B flat and an E flat. So we need to make sure we're observing those. I didn't really talk about that with the B flat chord. So if you were confused on that, I apologize. That is going to be a B flat at the very beginning there as well, just according to the key signature. Great. Okay. So let me add the E flat in there. Great. Okay. So we've got A, E flat, and G flat. Great. Okay. Then C on top here as well. So there is our chord. Now, again, I want to get everything down into one hand. So I'm going to bring that C down into the left hand. Now, typically I would get rid of sharps and flats here first. Okay, that's going to give us basically the same one, I think, is where we just came off of. But here, I'm going to actually keep the flats in here just because I'll explain that in just a moment. Basically, there's a type of chord that has 3 half steps between every single note. Okay, and anytime we see that, it's going to be what we call a diminished 7 chord. Kind of jumping ahead here, there's almost the answer. But basically what we can do is we can say, okay, here's A, and I count 1, 2, 3, right? And then 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, okay? Every single note has 3 half steps in between it. When we see that, again, we're going to call that a diminished chord. Now, because we have because we have 4 notes in this chord, we are going to call it a diminished 7 chord. Okay, again, 3 half steps in between every other note means it's a diminished chord. And if you have 4 notes in there total, it's going to be a diminished 7. Now this, we are going to call it an A diminished 7, mainly because it's on the bottom of our chord for now. And usually that A diminished 7 would then take us to a B flat chord. So we'll just see how that's all working here in the next chord. Sometimes it'll be a little bit different, but generally that's how that's going to work. Okay. So calling that A diminished 7, the way we write that is like this. Let's see. There we go. So A diminished is like a degrees symbol. Okay, now that's a little confusing, but that is how we write that in music. And then we're just going to simply put a 7 on it. Okay, there is something called a half diminished 7 and things like that, but here it is fully diminished because we have 3 half steps between every single note. Okay, that's the biggest thing with that chord. Great. Okay, going on.